I am known as Susan. I have reached the age of 58, joined in matrimony with my husband Paul for what seems like an eternity. Precisely 33 years. In the serene embrace of Cland, Ohio, we have crafted a tranquil existence in the suburbs. Our two children have matured and dispersed across various states, leading lives that I observe primarily through photographs and the rare Sunday phone call. Paul has dedicated nearly 2 decades of his career to the realm of corporate finance, remaining steadfast with the same company throughout this journey. Once, I held the esteemed position of a school librarian, but I embraced early retirement just last year. Recently, I've been occupying my hours with engaging in gardening, immersing myself in books, and participating in the occasional charity event alongside Paul, gracefully fulfilling the role of the devoted partner. It was one of those charity dinners that transformed everything. The invitation arrived from Paul's superior, Arthur Nash, a name that had echoed through the years, yet remained a stranger to me in the flesh. Paul portrayed him as keen, conventional, and somewhat aloof, the type of individual who eschewed trivialities yet commanded attention in every space he occupied. The event was underway in a secluded club nestled in the heart of downtown. One finds oneself enveloped in an ambience reminiscent of a bygone era, where dark wood paneling exudes warmth, soft piano melodies linger in the air, and waiters move with an effortless grace that transcends mere walking. That evening, I found myself enveloped in a subtle sense of self-awareness. With meticulous attention, I styled my hair, selected a navy dress that had long been tucked away, and applied a hint of lipstick that had remained untouched since our youngest's college graduation. It remains a mystery why I exerted myself so fervently. It was merely dinner, yet a part of me yearned to reclaim that sense of visibility once more. Upon our arrival, Paul made the introductions to his associates with a sense of honor. I extended my hand, engaged in courteous dialogue, and endeavored to maintain my interest as they discussed their trade. Then Arthur made his way forward. He stood taller than I had envisioned, his hair a striking silver, his jaw impeccably clean-shaven, and his eyes lingered on you just a heartbeat longer than necessary. His voice exuded calmness, yet beneath that tranquility lay a certain measured quality. "You must be Susan," he remarked, reaching out his hand in greeting. "Paul's mentioned you used to be a librarian. I've always believed that librarians hold the keys to hidden truths." I returned the smile with a touch of politeness, only the exceptional ones. His laughter was soft, sincere. He lingered in his emotions, unlike the others who had swiftly moved on. Instead, he lingered for a moment, inquiring about the books that captured my heart and the authors I held in high regard. He posed inquiries that had long been absent from my life, delving into the passions that ignited my spirit. Eventually, I took my place at the table, nestled between Paul and Arthur. The dinner unfolded at a leisurely pace, punctuated by the delicate clinks of silverware and the exchange of business anecdotes. At a certain moment, a name surfaced, one of a local author I held in high regard. As I spoke, Arthur shifted his gaze in my direction once more. "I had no idea you were so passionate about writing," he remarked, a hint of astonishment in his voice. I was on the verge of replying when I sensed it. His hand merely grazed mine, a whisper of contact beneath the table. It might have been a mere accident, yet it hung in the air, too prolonged to be brushed aside as inconsequential. His fingers brushed against my knuckles, warm and intentional, before retreating. I averted my gaze from him at first. My heart began its subtle thrum, and I became acutely aware of the warmth that enveloped the room. I cast a fleeting look finished. He remained fixated on another's words, as though the world around him had ceased to exist. Yet, when his gaze returned to me moments later, it held a tenderness, a subtle recognition. I slipped away to the restroom shortly thereafter, seeking a brief respite to gather my thoughts and navigate the tumult of emotions swirling within me. It transcended the simple allure of youthful infatuation, and it was devoid of any trepidation. It possessed a certain nuance. I experienced a profound sense of recognition. Upon my return to the table, I found Paul engrossed in conversation, while Arthur leisurely savored a glass of red wine. He gazed up at me as I settled into my seat, and for a fleeting moment, his hand grazed mine once more, this time with intention. It remained unspoken between us. There was no necessity for that. Yet, I sensed even at that moment that a change had occurred, subtle and unforeseen. Despite my attempts to convince myself it was likely insignificant, I couldn't ignore the flutter within me, reminiscent of the opening lines of a tale I hadn't realized I was eager to explore. The days following the dinner drifted by in a serene manner, at least outwardly, as Paul returned to the rhythm of his everyday life. In the quiet of early mornings, a travel mug cradles steaming coffee, quick kisses brush against cheeks, and the day stretches into long hours at the office. I occupied my time with familiar pursuits, nurturing my modest rose garden, sifting through cherished photographs, and meandering through the local farmers' market each Wednesday. Yet, despite my efforts, I remained unable to dispel the sensation of Arthur's hand grazing against mine, the way his gaze had held onto me, imbued with an essence that seemed to echo familiarity. It felt like an eternity since anyone had gazed at me in such a way, not from a sense of duty, nor from routine, but with true and insatiable desire to explore. Paul held a deep affection for me. My conviction has always remained steadfast. Yet, after 3 decades, love settles into a serene familiarity, woven into the fabric of daily routines. Arthur's gaze stirred a memory that had almost slipped from my mind. To be seen as a woman in your own right, beyond the role of a wife, is a profound experience. A few days later, Paul returned home and casually remarked that Arthur had extended an invitation to several couples from the office for a weekend gathering at his place. He desires for all to experience a deeper sense of connection. "It's merely a casual affair," he remarked, loosening his tie. "Arthur urged your presence, expressing his enjoyment engaging in conversation with you." I attempted to maintain an air of indifference, yet I could sense the warmth creeping into my cheeks. Did he really? Paul appeared oblivious to it. With a silent nod, he slipped away into the kitchen, intent on warming up the remnants of a previous meal. On that Saturday, we made our way to Arthur's residence, a stunning colonial-style house nestled within a wooded expanse just beyond the city limits. The atmosphere was crisp and fragrant with the essence of early spring, while gentle jazz wafted from the open windows. The gathering was intimate, perhaps 10 or 12 souls, each mingling with drinks in hand, laughter resonating through the air from the stone patio. Arthur welcomed us at the entrance, his characteristic grace enveloped in an easygoing allure. "Susan," he remarked, his smile radiating warmth. "You made it." "I'm glad." His hand lingered briefly on the small of my back as he guided us through the doorway. It was understated, yet intentional. My body sensed it before my mind could fully comprehend. As the evening unfolded, I felt an irresistible pull to engage in conversation with Arthur once more. We gathered by the fire pit in the backyard, the gentle crackle of flames dancing in the air between us. Paul had meandered away to engage in conversation about work with a few of the other gentlemen. Arthur presented me with a glass of white wine. "Your demeanor felt somewhat remote earlier. Is everything okay?" I paused, reluctant to acknowledge the frequency with which our last encounter occupied my thoughts. "At last," I remarked, lost in contemplation. "At times, it seems as though I have faded into the background since stepping away from my career." He regarded me intently for a brief moment. "Susan, you're anything but invisible." The way he uttered my name carried an air of intimacy, as if it were a cherished secret softly revealed to the world. I cast my eyes upon the flames, absorbing their warmth upon my visage. "You're kind to say that." "It's not kindness," he replied gently. "It is a truth." We lingered in quietude for a heartbeat, merely the two of us under the encroaching twilight. Then, with a tender touch, he extended his hand toward mine. This time, it was intentional. His thumb glided over the surface of my fingers, tracing slow, intentional circles. The gesture was subtle, unassuming in its intent. It simply existed. I hesitated, I began, but the words lodged themselves in my throat. "You haven't done anything wrong," he replied with a serene composure. "I have not either." I refrained from taking my "extend your hand." I also refrained from leaning into him. I allowed the moment to linger between us, reminiscent of the intertwining sense of smoke and jasmine wafting through the air. At last, a voice echoed from the patio, prompting our parting. Yet, a profound change had stirred within me once more, resonating at a deeper level this time. It transcended mere visibility. It was a sensation of awakening, as if a part of me had gently roused from a long slumber. As Paul and I departed into the night, I felt Arthur's gaze lock onto mine once again. No words, merely that familiar gentle gaze, recognizing what had transpired without an absence of guilt or pressure, replaced solely by understanding. As we drove home, Paul hummed along with the radio, blissfully unaware, while I sat beside him, gazing out at the moonlit road stretching ahead. I felt a sense of uncertainty about this new path we were on, yet I couldn't ignore its presence. The week that ensued carried an air of distinction, as if the cadence of my existence had quietly adjusted by a half step. No visible alterations had occurred. Each morning, Paul would immerse himself in the pages of the newspaper. I continued to fold the laundry as the soothing notes of old jazz drifted from our kitchen radio, yet within me, a quiet unraveling was taking place. Or perhaps it was revealing itself. Uncertainty lingered in my mind. Arthur remained silent, neither calling nor writing, though he had no obligation to do so. There were no vows, no digits traded, nothing at all to signify it. A mere brush, a fleeting look, an unspoken connection that resonated well beyond the instant it graced. Yet, Friday arrived. During dinner, Paul shared that Arthur had extended an invitation to him for a new client dinner in the downtown area. "It's primarily for show," he remarked, pausing to savor a piece of roasted chicken. "Spouses are invited, but I mentioned you most likely would prefer to avoid yet another lengthy evening filled with tedious corporate discussions." I hesitated before responding. The candle danced softly in the middle of the table, and I could sense the heavy silence of the unasked question hanging in the atmosphere. What if I actually wanted to go? I finally uttered, catching even myself off guard. Paul lifted his gaze. "Are you certain I could use a night out?" And so it was that 2 nights later I slipped into a soft burgundy dress, a silk scarf draped gracefully around my shoulders, as I entered a tranquil, upscale restaurant bathed in low lighting, gleaming mahogany walls. Arthur stood by the wine display, engaged in conversation with another, but upon catching sight of me, his demeanor shifted noticeably. Initially, there was no smile, only a moment of stillness, a lingering gaze, followed by the faintest hint of a smile at the edge of his lips. "Susan," he remarked once we were all settled, "you look elegant." I offered a quiet thank you, mindful not to overdo it with Paul right beside me. Yet, there lingered an unspoken connection between us once more, a current unseen by anyone else. Dinner unfolded at a leisurely pace and conversation flowed around quarterly results, client expectations, market shifts. I nodded and sipped my wine, yet most of my awareness was focused on the space between Arthur and me. There were no touches this time. No glances that would raise suspicion, just restraint cloaked in decorum, but beneath it a spark glowed steady. After dessert, Paul excused himself to take a work call. Arthur leaned slightly toward me once we were alone. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. He studied my face. "You haven't I ceased to ponder it further." It was not a matter of inquiry, nor did I refute it. "I have spent the majority of my life in marriage," I murmured. "I have no desire to become the sort of woman who is carried away by something trivial." He acknowledged my words, and for a fleeting moment, I believed he might retreat, yet he remained. Instead, he replied, "I don't perceive you as foolish in the slightest. I believe you've remained silent for far too long." Those words resonated within me, awakening a longing I hadn't realized was there, yearning to be acknowledged. "I'm not requesting anything," he went on. "Not this evening. Perhaps never at all. However, should you ever feel the urge to engage in a genuine conversation, I would welcome that opportunity. There's no need for pressure, only honesty." I held my gaze steady, even as silence lingered in the air, choosing not to respond immediately. Paul reappeared moments later, as the night settled into a tranquil hush. We bid our farewells. Arthur extended his hand to Paul, the gesture imbued with a professional warmth, and as he pivoted towards me, his touch was fleeting, adhering strictly to the bounds of decorum. Directed his gaze. His eyes whispered a tale of their own. During the journey back, Paul engaged in a discussion about projections and budgets. I gazed into the distance. The window framed a tapestry of city lights, their golden patterns weaving through the fabric of my thoughts. I found myself caught in a delicate balance between two existences, the life I had adhered to with unwavering devotion and the new one that began to stir just beneath the surface. As we rolled into the driveway, Paul tightened his grip on my hand. "Thanks for coming tonight," he said, a smile gracing his lips. It meant a lot. I returned the smile, yet my heart remained restless. For the first time in years, I lay awake deep into the night, not from worry, but from contemplation. A week slipped by. Then two. I continued with the days unfolded as they always did. Grocery runs, weekend brunch with a neighbor, sorting through spring decorations in the attic. Yet beneath the surface of this routine, something soft and persistent tugged at my heart. Arthur hadn't reached out. He hadn't needed to. That dinner, that final exchange of words, had left its indelible mark, and though I couldn't quite articulate what was blossoming within me, I sensed it was about more than him. It was about me, about the woman I had hidden away beneath layers of habit, loyalty, and the passage of time. One morning, while Paul was shaving and humming out of tune in the bathroom, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, gazing at my reflection in the window above it. Not merely looking, but truly seeing. My face had transformed since my 30s and 40s, yet there was a fullness now. An honesty, a life lived, and a beauty that resonated in its own unique way. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Arthur. "I'm headed to the gallery opening you mentioned Saturday at 4. You said the Monet exhibit always moved you. If you happen to be there." The gentle illumination. I found myself captivated by the brushstrokes, each canvas whispering stories of light and color. The air was thick with the scent of paint and history, and I wandered through the gallery, lost in a reverie. Time slipped away as I moved from one masterpiece to another, each piece drawing me deeper into its world. I felt a connection to the artists, their emotions echoing in the silence around me. It was a moment suspended in time, a quiet escape from the everyday, where beauty reigned supreme and the outside world faded into a distant memory. Track lights and brush strokes that danced in impressionistic blur. I wandered for a while alone, pausing in front of water lilies, letting the peace of the colors settle something inside me. Then I saw him. Arthur stood near a window, hands clasped loosely in front of him. He wasn't searching for me. He wasn't pacing. He was simply waiting. When our eyes met, he smiled, not with expectation, but recognition. I walked toward him, each step quiet on the polished floor. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure I would," I replied. "I wasn't sure either," he replied. After that, silence enveloped us, a heavy blanket that muted our thoughts. We wandered through the rooms, past vibrant hues, and into a stillness that resonated more profoundly than words ever could. Eventually, we found ourselves before a painting depicting a misty morning garden. His voice, barely above a whisper, pierced the quiet. "I know you love your husband. I'm not here to threaten that. But I wanted to be someone who reminds you that you're still allowed to feel more." I swallowed hard, taken aback by his unexpected confession. My fingers against his, a fleeting moment that lingered in the air between us. I wasn't searching for anything specific, yet here we were, caught in a delicate web of unspoken understanding. I turned to him, curiosity etched on my face. "So what now?" He shrugged, a soft gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't for him to decide. There was no dramatic kiss or sweeping declaration, only the subtle bond forged in the quiet corners of an unexpected encounter. As we stepped out of the exhibit, the afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, illuminating our silhouettes. At the threshold, I let my hand graze his, a mere whisper of contact that held the promise of something more. Fingers. This time it was I who lingered. "I'm not sure where this leaves me," I murmured softly. He met my gaze. Maybe not knowing is okay. And somehow it was. I drove home with the window down, the spring breeze lifting the ends of my hair. I didn't feel as though I had cheated. I didn't feel as though I had betrayed. I felt awakened, alive. That night, I sat beside Paul on the couch as he read his paper. I looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time in a long while, I wanted to talk not about Arthur, but about us, about the aspects we ceased to observe, regarding our former selves and the possibilities that may still lie ahead if we summon the courage to pursue them. Occasionally, the most astonishing element of being recognized by another is the clarity it brings in allowing us to truly perceive ourselves.